On Tuesday, out of the blue, Donald Trump announced a plan to remove the population of Gaza to Egypt and Jordan, take American ownership over the territory and turn it into what he calls a Riviera of the Middle East. This is commonly known as ethnic cleansing, but he presented a crime against humanity as an exciting business opportunity. Some Israeli politicians are thrilled. Everyone else considers it criminal and absurd. And this epitomizes what we're discussing today. In the midst of a constitutional crisis and a looming economic crisis, if tariffs go ahead, Trump drops a bombshell and politicians and reporters scramble to make sense of it. Is it simply a distraction or a new horror to take seriously? The writer Martin Robbins compares it to the overwhelming bombardment of a denial of service attack on a website. So how does anyone focus on the right things amid a tsunami of extreme and often illegal initiatives? Matt, you don't have to go into enormous detail here, but what was your reaction to this impromptu ethnic cleansing plan?
That's a leading question. I mean, it's funny you said...
I didn't expect you to like it.
Yeah, I was going to say, or as the media put it, his breathtaking, unconventional, surprising. It's all this kind of stuff. Ethnic cleansing is what he is saying he would do. I mean, it's funny you said you don't have to go into great detail on this. He hasn't. Like, he's clearly just sort of thought it up as a thing. It feels like he thought it up on the way to the podium. You know, it's this. He says, "I've really thought about it. I've talked about it." He even said things like, everybody I've spoken to loves this idea, which is that form of words he used when basically what he means is, I think it's a good idea, and everyone around me just nodded because that's what people do.
Well, the Israeli opposition leader, rather disgracefully, I think, did not say this is awful, but just went, well, look forward to hearing some details. And it's like, don't know if you're going to get him, mate.
Yeah. I mean, Netanyahu even said things like, well, it's different, isn't it? I mean, he literally said it's different in the way that, someone seeing you with a new haircut go, oh, it's different. Isn't it? That's brave. And obviously Netanyahu, this is great for him. This is a way of him sort of shoring up his support with the far right members of his government. He can say, look, I'm the link between Trump and Israel. You need me to make this happen. But even he, you could see in the press conference and afterwards, was sort of going, well, this is mad, isn't it? But I guess I'm just going to go
You're
ahead.
not meant to say the genocide out loud.
It's crazy. I mean, he said literally, Netanyahu said, well, you say things others refuse to say. And after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and they say, he's right, which is not true. I think after the jaws drop, everyone goes, that's awful. That's a bad thing.
Right. So the question here, I suppose, is like, do you take it seriously? Do you do the thing of just like, well, how would this work? Or do you just go, well, this is just brain drivel? But I noticed that bank analysts were caught out by Trump's trade war because they assumed all his talk of tariffs was just too stupid to be real. And these are people who get paid millions to make predictions about business and the financial markets. So, I mean, is the lesson there, as someone from Goldman Sachs could tell you, that actually nothing is so stupid that you can just dismiss it?
Yes, it is. It is slightly more complicated than that, I think. I mean, Morgan Stanley, I think, the head of Morgan Stanley was especially shocked because, he'd been going along with Trump and then suddenly Trump did what he said he was going to do. And it was turned out to be an immense shock. But they were assuming, of course, that while Trump said he'd do these things, that he might even try to do those things, that he would not be able to do them in such a rapid way, and that somehow Congress, Senate, the courts would delay or stop them. And now we're into the realm of asking what happens if Trump does them anyway and just ignores all those checks and balances. Does the rule of law still apply in America at the moment? And, the answer you've really got to make based on the evidence the past 2 weeks is, well, we don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, there will be more on this because this seems to be the approach all round. John, on the tariff story, the BBC's North America correspondent Sarah Smith claimed that the tariffs had forced concessions from Canada and Mexico, and that was why they were being dropped, even though Canada and Mexico simply re-announced what they had already agreed regarding border security. And so I actually was listening to that and just going, but that's not what happened. So even more so than last time, has Trump sort of short-circuited impartial journalism? Because the BBC seems to be really, really underperforming on this administration.
Yeah, I think that line you quoted about it being a denial of service attack is really on the money. It's the problem is you literally can't keep up. If you're reporting on this stuff, by the time you've kind of like spoken to experts and double checked your facts, like 4 other things have happened. and you don't know what's meant as posturing. You don't know what he's saying off the cuff. You don't know what's a real plan. You don't know when he's like trying to distract from something else. When he's flying a flag to test the waters. That's a horrible mixed metaphor, but you know what I mean. Like there's so many different options when he just says one of these things, and by the time you've had a chance to think about it, 18 other things have happened. And a lot of the things they're doing right now they're slightly technical. Like you do actually have to sort of delve into them to work out what is going on and what it means and what effects it could have. You do need to report them out. You can't just kind of like take them at face value. And add to the fact that, like, if you're the BBC, rightly so, you have sort of a bit of a norm against calling someone a liar. It's very difficult to kind of like put all these things in context before the next thing has happened.
Well, okay, but let's look at the big picture, right? I'm not getting it too listy, but for example, purging civil servants, pledging to build concentration camps in Guantanamo Bay, erasing trans people as a sort of legal entity, pulling international aid that will, as we said, directly kill children, instituting a McCarthyite attack on DEI, and breaking the law all the time. Now, obviously, I don't expect the BBC to say, today, fascist President Donald Trump. But I mean, are the stakes coming across sufficiently in the mainstream media? Because I do feel a dissonance between what I'm seeing on Blue Sky and from a lot of American reporters and then what I hear on the radio.
No, I mean, quite obviously not. I mean, the fact that
Leading question. Well done.
Yeah, but, it can be understandable why they're fucking it up. That doesn't mean they're not fucking it up. I mean, did you see that widely mocked thing Chris Mason posted saying, cryptic, threatening, yet tantalizing, Trump's gifts for delivering an overnight missive strikes again.
Tantalizing.
I know. And it sounds like, I mean, forgive
like
me.
a Tinder profile.
I was going to say, it sounds like he's got the horn. It sounds like Mason is excited by this. And what Trump was, this is about EU tariffs. This was about something that could, as I understand it, potentially bring about a global recession. That is maybe not the right tone of voice for this. But I think the problem is if you don't have time to kind of like do the reporting, and you can't just say, well, this guy's fucking nuts. A lot of the time, what the reporters are doing is they're kind of like falling back on like basically writing about the act of journalism. So they're basically saying, it is very exciting to be me right now. This just happened. Isn't that fun? Because like that's sort of the only thing left on the table.
Well, I think unfortunately that is a Chris Mason problem. He always just seems like terribly excited. Like shit's happening. That thing with who used to just go like when a wasp flew into a classroom and everyone just ran out. And it's a bit like that. And sometimes there is a very intense dissonance between that tone and the gravity of what is actually being reported. And he ends up in this sort of love him or hate him. You've got to admit he's spicy.
Isn't part of the problem perhaps that not enough people with profile are having a go back, being critical of Trump, because everybody in our government are trying not to do anything to draw attention to him.
Yeah.
And therefore the journalists, they usually do a sort of, well, they said this, but they said this. And it feels like the Democrats are kind of all over the place in the States, and no one with any kind of proper profile is standing up and going, this is mad. And I think that's why it feels like the BBC's coverage of the Gaza situation has been a bit more strong, because there are immediately people in power go, this is bad, and they can report that.
I think you're right that there's not enough voices to sort of to put that more dramatically. You can't expect the BBC to say this is authoritarianism, this is inhumane, but they can have other people come on and do that.
But also, Chris Mason, I don't understand why he wrote that piece anyway that you're referring to. And he's the political editor, the British political editor. It's not actually his ground. There are many more people better qualified working for the BBC in North America who were able to comment. Don't know why he was wading in. I really don't.
Well, for the same reason we're talking about this rather than leaving it to American friction, I think. It's like, if you're following politics,
it's the thing.
It is the thing to talk about right now.
Well, yeah, but he specifically has a job title. I don't have a job title, thank God. I can just witter on about whatever I want to, and no one seems to mind. Well, sometimes they do.
Anyway, we will leave Chris Mason alone for a minute. Matt, Ezra Klein in the New York Times has a good line that the US system of government isn't a solid edifice, but a set of norms in a trench coat. And then if you knock the norms down, the whole thing collapses. And I've been thinking a lot about the Constitution, reading Jill Lepore, who wrote a book about the Constitution. And it makes me think, do you think any constitution, however carefully written, can survive the people of the country electing someone like this who doesn't give a fuck?
I mean, the Constitution was was specifically written to avoid this happening.
We don't like Mad King George III.
Kings with loads of power,
Yeah.
authority in one place. We are deliberately splitting the authority out. We are deliberately creating, a tripartite system.
They had a war, Matt. That's how much they didn't like Mad Kings.
Yeah. The problem is the separation of powers relies on the people who have power wanting it and wanting to exercise it, because Congress still has a lot of power. But if you have a Congress which is on the side of the person who's president and has decided that they're completely subordinate to him, then there is no power in Congress. If you have no will to actually make it happen. But I think it's also worth stepping back and remembering that our system is just as bad, that we don't really have very many checks and balances in our system. Famously, a government with a majority is an elective dictatorship and all that kind of thing. They can push through anything. The Safety of Rwanda bill last year declared that Rwanda was a safe country, despite what the court said. It was very specifically, taking on the courts and saying, we don't think you have any relevance. Labour have scrapped the Rwanda scheme. As far as I'm aware, they haven't rescinded that legislation. So that is still on the law books. Rwanda is a safe country. We have legislated for something that is not a fact.
Yeah, I mean, we have, fewer checks and balances. That's what, critics of the British system were saying for ages. Like, we need a constitution like America.
Can I come in on the point about the Constitution? I think it is worth noting that, they did have that little war, but then they did basically want George Washington to be president for life. And it was only him sort of going, no, I'm going to stand down, I'm going to go farm, that kind of meant that didn't become the norm. And it took, I think it's 1824, the election when John Quincy Adams becomes president. It takes them less than 40, slightly more. It's about 40 years to go from being a new country with a new constitution to electing a guy president because his dad was president. Yeah. Like that kind of monarchical impulse is still very rooted in the US system, even though they pretend otherwise.
Roz, obviously people have been screaming at the Democrats to do something. What can they do, considering they don't control the White House or either side, House of Congress?
There's quite a bit they can do, and they have been doing some of it already. I mean, they've basically agitating by the Democrats and resulting, and lawsuits and so on, basically ensured that the freeze on federal spending last week was stopped, and the free on financial assistance programs, and the birthright citizenship order was stopped too because they made such a fuss. So there's that. There's going the legal
by
route.
Judges, we should say, not by
yes, obviously by judges who they brought lawsuits and the judges agreed with them. And there's also, of course, helping people to understand why these are such bad decisions. And that speaks to what John was saying earlier, because this is often really complicated. This particular brand of techno-authoritarianism, if you want to call it that, which is a word I keep seeing banded around now, it's about destroying computer files rather than burning books. It's hard to grasp. It's done out of sight. It's difficult to explain to ordinary people what it actually means. So there's the role of doing that. There's pointing out that Musk is completely unelected, which I think is very important given that the enormous amount of power he seems to have been given. And then there's the ability to jam up government. So the Democrat Senator for Connecticut, Chris Murphy, for example, was saying, basically, I'm not going to vote for any Trump nominees. I'm not going to enable government to happen. I'm going to try and jam it up if this crisis continues. And there's quite a lot you can achieve by doing that. There is, though, and I think this is an unspoken thing, there's a bit of a temptation sometimes to wait and let ordinary people see the damage that Trump is doing for themselves and hope that they then realise, oh my God, this is really bad. And so it's popular outrage that will be pushing back rather than the Democrats who are pushing back. But I do suspect that when we're thinking about whichever Democrat it turns out to be who runs for the presidency in 2028, fingers crossed there is a run for the presidency in 2028.
Fingers crossed there's a planet.
It will be one of
territory.
one of the people who stood up now.
Yeah.
And not one of the people who stay quiet.
I like the stunts. I like this is a bit we're trying to get into a federal building as members of Congress and we've been locked out. And I think Matt made a great point there that, the whole point in the Constitution is that Congress is meant to be really protective of its own power. And it's not meant to just be supine in front of the president if the president is of the same party.
They are co-equal branches. That's a really key phrase.
That's the point. But the partisanship is so strong. And, Republicans are the ones to blame for all of this, really, for his political comeback, waving through these nominees like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., which, it's obvious that they don't all think that these are good ideas and maybe active threats to the well-being of America. And obviously people say, oh, Democrats. Are Republicans sort of getting less criticism literally because the bar is now so low that really nobody expects anything from them? It's just a waste of time going, why don't some Republicans say something?
Yeah, we're in a patronage situation now. We're in a situation where these guys know that their future advancement and their careers depend on Trump, and he will toss them aside if they don't fall into line. And so they've all fallen into line. We even saw people like Nikki Haley, who made some extremely valid and cogent criticisms of Trump when she was running, earlier in the campaign, just fall in and go ahead and just go along with it. We expect nothing better because the Republican Party surrendered itself to Trump. It lay down underneath him and it said, do what you want.
But the thing about Nikki Haley is a good example that she did that, but then he put out a message almost immediately after being inaugurated saying, we're not going to have anything to do with any of these people, and she was one of them. So it didn't help. She made the mistake of being against him ever.
Yeah.
You can't.
He never forgets.
No.
Never.
So pathetic. John, Ros talked there about that there's been some success in the courts and blocking some of these unconstitutional measures. But this is not what most Trump voters voted for. The fact is that most Trump voters were thinking, we would like a world before COVID. And they had this weird, ignorant view of just it was everything. We didn't have inflation and everything was just kind of normal. It wasn't normal because Donald Trump was president, but okay.
Most people aren't watching politics.
They don't
at
want
any
this.
point.
So how optimistic that public opinion at some point will kick in and prove that there are actually consequences? Because you can say, okay, sure, they're not following it and they didn't give a shit about US aid being closed down and lots of people dying as a result. But obviously there are things that could happen where they're not getting their Medicare payments, or tariffs are causing massive inflation, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think if it all goes as badly wrong for the people on the ground as it looks like it might, then a bunch of people who voted for Donald Trump because they were a bit upset at the price of eggs going up are probably going to be quite annoyed about that. But firstly, I don't think that will affect a large cohort of true believers. They will be able to explain that away because there's a sort of element of conspiracism, and I don't think that's not enough to win an election.
It's not, yeah.
There isn't an election for a while.
Well, I think the midterms, you could quite easily see Republicans get.
Oh, I think you could too.
whacking.
But how much damage are they going to do before then? And also, is part of the damage they're going to be fiddling elections? They've already made it harder to vote in certain states where the Republicans control state government because it's the state governments that kind of run the elections. This, so far as I can see, kind of gives them more power to do that kind of thing. I think probably his popularity is going to go off a cliff. I'm just not sure that's meaningfully going to make a difference in the immediate future.
Matt, Elon Musk and what has been wittily termed his Shitler youth, these kind of terrible, callow youths, including a 19-year-old who called himself Big Balls online, have seized access to the federal payment system.
I'm so glad the internet wasn't a thing when I was 19.
Yeah, that would have been your name. Well, and obviously what he's doing is completely illegal. Doge isn't even a government department. Musk has not been elected, etc., etc. And when Musk took over Twitter, what he did was he broke contracts and defied regulations on the basis that he'd just pay the fines and get on with it. Is this essentially what he's doing? I think he even used the same email subject matter, a fork in the road.
Fork in the road, yeah.
It's like shape up or ship out kind of thing. And is what we're seeing just fucking do it and the consequences will be less bad.
Yeah, it is the old... It's become a real cliche now, but the move fast and break things thing is very clearly this. But also, a lot of things did go wrong with Twitter early on when Musk bought it. There were several outages, things went wrong, data got lost, the videos didn't work for days at a time, things like that, which was sort of fine because it's just in the end a social media site. But if that goes wrong in the government, if people don't get paid their benefits or, people don't get paid to go to work so they don't go to work and so things shut down, that happens... That could quickly cause scandals and quickly cause problems. And in the end, Twitter is a monarchy. Like he runs it like a king. You can't do that with the government. You just like the government.
In
Government
theory.
is but government is in the end elastic. There will be a snapback moment. I'm not saying it can't be very bent out of shape and it can't take a lot of damage, but there will be a point at which things will snap back, and even if that's just public opinion, it's difficult though, because I think at the moment Democrats are being. There's a danger, I think, that we and the Democrats and the left generally, or the anti-Trump, anti-Musk brigade, end up sort of saying things like this isn't normal or this is illegal, and that all sounds a bit technical and a bit sort of, it's almost like an appeal to authority, a bit appeal to status quo, and people, if they voted for anything, they voted against the status quo. So I think they need to keep banging the drum in a much more specific way. As Ross said,
this will hurt you.
This will hurt you. He has access to your social security number, which is a big deal. He's got access to payment systems. He can veto all government spending. He could literally turn off your pension tomorrow if he wanted to. Is that what you want?
And nobody voted for him. I do think that this kind of like Trump thinks he's a king, but at least he was elected. Musk thinks he's a king, and he wasn't. And that does seem to be a kind of very easy attack line.
Definitely. And I think that's working. And I think the danger is that there's a lot of people who I've heard say, and we've said it on this podcast, well, Trump and Musk will fall out eventually. And they probably will, but it might be a while before that happens. And they could have caused a lot of damage.
Yeah, it took a while for Thomas Cromwell to be executed.
Yeah.
Are we anti-Thomas Cromwell now?
Well, I heard Russ.
Well,
I saw an article describing Russ Vought as the Thomas Cromwell, there are lots of Cromwells, lots of potential Thomas
he
Cromwells.
did some good stuff, some bad stuff.
I have to reread Wolf Hall to work out the analogy. That's like the highbrow version of, when someone just goes, well, if Trump is Voldemort, who's WYSIWYG or whatever the other characters are called, and then we should just do it with Wolf Hall. And be
I absolutely do not believe. I do not believe you can't name a second Harry Potter character. I think you're just trying to pretend that you're too highbrow for it.
I was just taking the piss out of it. That's what I was doing, John. Roz, Ezra Klein wrote an interesting piece that seems to be read in two different ways. I was really intrigued. I thought it was really good. Some people thought it was awful. And his basic argument seems to be that Trump is both strong, obviously, in his use of executive power, and there's this kind of fringe but increasingly powerful legal opinion of unitary executive authority, which basically the president can do whatever he wants, and weak because he's uninterested in using Congress to enshrine his changes in law. And ultimately, you would like to think that for things to become permanent, they can't be executive orders, which can be reversed by the next president, but they have to be enshrined in law. And so he's saying, to some extent, this kind of impression of like him being unstoppable is a confidence trick. And some people reading that were just like, oh, he's really complacent. He says there's nothing to worry about. Like, what do you make of that strong, weak argument?
It's a beautifully written piece. I think he's using the wrong model. It's to think with. It's understandable that he should use that model because it's the model we've been using to think with for a very long time, but I fear it's no longer valid. I don't think Klein quite grasps how much Trump wants to govern outside the law. He wants to create a direct connection between himself and, I would say, the voters, but it would probably be more accurate to say the people, because I think ideally they wouldn't even have to vote. Yeah, remember that time when he said, "Oh, just vote for me this once, and you won't have to do it again," and everyone laughed and said, "Oh,
He doesn't mean that."
Yeah. He wants that direct connection. He wants it unmediated by the law or the government. There's just Trump, executive, doing whatever Trump says, and he really believes he understands and is enacting the will of the people. And we're back to, the classic enemies of the people territory that we've so often talked about in the context of Brexit. So he is weak in that sense, as long as the law can still be mustered against him. And that is reassuring for Ezra Klein, and I understand why he wants to be reassured. But if Trump can pass through that zone, and if he can persuade enough Americans that their constitution and their laws and all their system is redundant, then we are in another world that I don't think Ezra Klein can quite bring himself to conceive of yet.
Well, I think he accepts that if the law, if the courts try and strike something down and Trump ignores that, then we are in a new world.
Yeah.
That we're in a constitutional crisis that we've not seen before.
Well, I mean, I suppose the best case, though, is it all falls to shit. He's incredibly unpopular. and he loses, and a Democrat wins next time, right? But he's dismantling illegally again U.S. aid, threatening to do the same to the Department of Education, FEMA, God knows what else. Plus, there's going to be a massive brain drain of federal employees because they're being offered like payoffs, and the ones that can get better jobs in the private sector will take them, and the ones that can't are the ones that are going to stay. So you're basically just telling all the best people to leave. So even if Democrats retook the presidency and Congress and there was a sort of national repudiation of Trump, I mean, are we looking at permanent structural damage, or at least long-term structural damage, that you can't just kind of like put a department back together when it's been disassembled?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, how long is it since he was sworn in? Is it 2 weeks?
Also
2 and a bit. Yeah.
2 and a bit.
Also a million years.
Also a million years. Well, yeah, he's got 4 years, and this has only been 2 weeks. And look at how much damage he's done already. It's just like everything is speeded up. And as you say, people will get other jobs because they know there's, the next 4 years is a write-off as far as they're concerned. Otherwise, the expertise is lost. The trust in the U.S. government is damaged, and that goes because he's attacking institutions that work abroad, like the CIA, like the USAID. That has a ripple effect. And some of the people working for the US there will, go and perhaps work for other similar organisations and governments, but they will never have quite the same trust that they did as they did before in the ability of the US to behave in the right way.
And in the same way, I find that the rest of the world can't trust America. That was the lesson of the Biden years. It was just kind of like, that was an aberration. America's back. You can rely on us. And now the message seems to be, actually, you can never rely on America as an international ally or on the government ever again.
Yeah.
Well, this is a whole other problem, in that it's not just that Trump has to go at some point. If he is not punished,
It's to be rooted out.
yeah, if he does not suffer some personal consequences for doing this, there is absolutely no reason why someone else won't try and to take a similar line later.
And he may well die in office and be instantly replaced by J.D. Vance, which I suspect it is quite a high possibility. Come on, 4 years, how old is he?
John, just to wrap up, last time Trump supporters sneered at Trump derangement syndrome, by which they meant sort of getting hysterical. Is the danger this time, looking at the more muted opposition and the lack of big marches and so on, like Trump despair syndrome, this idea that, and I felt this in the reaction to the Ezra Klein piece, there was almost like, don't you dare give us any hope that Trump can be stopped?
I mean, I don't think it's either or. I think you can be hysterical in a kind of like subdued, hopeless way. I think that's probably going to be the defining term.
Sad and mad.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big problem is a lot of people just want to switch off. Like, I think that's one of the big problems facing the resistance, for want of a better phrase, is that it's really difficult to kind of keep looking at this stuff when it's just so relentlessly horrendous. It's going to do horrible things for your mental health. You are completely powerless to affect it a lot of the time. You certainly feel powerless. And the end result of this might be that he destroys the economy or the climate or like sets off World War III. It's so tempting to just switch off the news.
Also, when half the stories are reversed within a day anyway.
Yeah.
The tariffs are on Canada, and I was like, what's going to happen to they've not on to Canada anymore. Or maybe it'll be next week, or maybe it'll be the week after. There's that feeling of sort of instability as well.
You can't live at that pace the whole time, yeah.
Oh, it's a classic situation where you've got a prisoner, and if you keep giving them a little bit of hope, and then you take it away, and you keep that's a situation that they've got us into.
But I would advise not despairing. I'm just going to say that. I think it's quite important. Particularly if you're somebody in America living under that who has any power whatsoever to do something.